When Joe first asked me to do this, he asked me to talk about Wenrich Cemetery. And then we realized that the church gets kind of all intermingled with Wenrich Cemetery, so we have to talk about Wenrich Church. And then the next thing I knew, he was commenting about the how we take care of this, maintain the cemetery, how we've improved the cemetery, and so that got added on. So I'm going to be talking about all three things tonight, a little bit of each, and then you can ask questions however you would like. I'm Kathy Gifford. I am the chair of the History Preservation Committee at St. Thomas United Church of Christ, which previously was Wenrich Church. And over the last few years, because I've been the chair of the committee and so involved in the history of the church, I've kind of become the historian, but not really. Joe says I probably know more about the church than anybody, but I know somebody up here who probably knows every bit that I know too, because Bill has been into the history of that church for a long time. So you can't say it's only me, it's also him. And Bill sits on this committee too. He's on the committee with me, so he gets involved in this stuff, and more now that he's back from Poland. So, when did Wenrich Church start? Boy, we wish we knew. And Bill has been trying to find some documentation that would prove that it was 1730. And there are publications about the church or brochures from the past that you can read, and they all have different dates, 1740, 1765. I think 1765 is a little late. You'll see in a minute or two that Nevin Moyer had a note in with the cemetery information about somebody buried there in 1752. So that kind of says to me the church was around too. And then recently I got an email from a Hinkle, a current day Hinkle, who is working like mad on his genealogy and was asking for information on Caspar Hinkle and Caspar's father, Caspar Hinkle, who he knew that the father, he has a source that indicates the father was in this area in 1756. And we have baptism records that list that Caspar as the father of the younger Caspar. So that's 1756 that they were in this area. The baptism records, though, were from 1801. So, you know, it doesn't really prove, but evidently he has a source for 1756. So I'll go with that at least, and probably before that. The congregations at this time were Episcopalian and Presbyterian at the very beginning of the church in this area. Then the Germans started moving into the area, and it became the German Lutherans and the German Reformed. And there were 4 congregations that shared one side of a 2-room log building to use as a church when it wasn't being used as the school. And on the other side of the building is where the school teacher resided. The pastor didn't usually reside there because the pastor covered a lot of different churches in the area, so he was bouncing around all over the place, and he usually just stayed with families in the area. So this is not a perfect picture. This is a good guess of what it would have looked like. Nevin Moyer had this drawn back in the early 1900s, and he had people in the area and his parents telling him what they had heard it was like. After they moved to the second building, that first log building stayed around for a while and was used as a residence. The log building was at the furthest western side of the church property. This second building, which they completed in 1794 and they used till 1857, was in the middle of the cemetery. At that time, it was probably built on the edge of the cemetery, but the cemetery has grown, and now when you, let me show you this one, when you see the cemetery now, and I put an arrow approximately where the second building was, when you see that cemetery, you'll see stones all around what would have been the second church. But when the second building was there, most of the burials were these front ones in this picture. And the back ones are the later 1920, 1930 burials, which are up and over the little rise. So that's where the second building was. We do have a drawing that was also done by Nevin Moyer that his parents described to him the interior of the second church building. And it's interesting to study this. I'm not going to go into detail about it tonight, but you can see the men and the women sat on different sides of the church. And there was the kind of standard pew area, and then up on either side of the pulpit were the amen corners where the older men and older women or the elders of the church sat. The pulpit was up high, and there was a railing around, like a little fence around the pulpit area. In 1856, they started building a third church building, and it really is the present sanctuary building of our church. And the Cornerstone Ceremony was September 13th, 1856. We know that because it was written up in one of the church papers. And they completed it in 1857. This picture is a little bit off because at some point in time somebody decided they had to occlude everything that was in the sky, and they pasted on, they did a cutout around the church with a piece of paper and put a pasted paper over the sky so that it looked like that, and then they added white to the trim of the church. We don't know why that happened, but this is one of the few pictures, in fact, I think it's about the only one we know of the 1856 church before it was renovated. Notice there are two doors in the front. There are small windows high up because there was a balcony there on the inside, and the windows lit that balcony area. And there are 3 windows down either side of this building. Notice how high they are. They were put in place so that the congregation couldn't see out the windows during services. At least they could see up to the sky, but that was about it, because they were supposed to be paying attention to that pastor. And the windows, there's no looking at what was going on outside. So, but in 1891, evidently that gave way. But we'll talk about that in a minute. I wanted you to see this. Many of you have probably seen this before. You probably have the calendar where this picture is. Back when we celebrated the Lingelstown 250th, Judy Schaefer, who's going to also talk to you tonight, created this beautiful painting of the church, the 1856 church. And she did it in wintertime. And it's most unique because we don't have any pictures of the church in wintertime, and this is kind of nice to have. Okay, 1891-92, the church was really big time renovated. The congregation worshiped in the Mount Zion School across the road from the church so that they could tear the sanctuary pretty much apart and put it back together again. And some of the walls. If you notice what happened to it, there are no longer 2 front doors, there's just 1 front door. And it has a large transom window above it, and there are stained glass windows all around the church, the arched stained glass windows that are still there. Some of them have moved a little, but we still have all of them. And they put a lot into those windows. The families donated money, and each window is a memorial to some family members. And they're really beautiful stained glass. This is my favorite picture. I love seeing the buggies beside the church. There aren't that many buggies there, so I'm wondering where all the other buggies are, because the congregation listed by the pastors meticulously every Sunday who was there, were like 50, 60 people. So there must be buggies parked behind the church as well, or this wasn't taken during a service, I'm not sure. But you can see the cemetery in this picture on the left-hand side, off to that side of the church. Finally, in 1959, they added restrooms to the church. Just think about that. In 1958, they were still using the outhouse behind the church as for a restroom with the church. So Bill, who was about 13 years old at that point in time, I'm telling his age, I happen to know we're the same age, so I can calculate this. So anyways, he remembers the outhouses, and they were all, I think, they had the smell, yes. So what was added was this educational wing and a small foyer that you can see at the left-hand side of the educational wing, and the restrooms on the second and first floors. The educational wing also had a fellowship hall and a kitchen, so they brought themselves up to what you would expect for a 1959 church. And this is the current complex. There have been other additions since then. There's added on to the educational wing out the end of it. We added a complete other wing that is fellowship, the big fellowship hall now. The old fellowship hall was divided up into smaller classrooms, and it doesn't show in this picture because of all the trees, but the front of the church now has a large foyer on it, added out towards the road. So we are a fairly big complex now. The upper left-hand corner kind of hides the pavilion back there that is used for chicken barbecues. And this picture was taken, I think, last year, so it's kind of up to date. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this guy. This is the Reverend John Weinbrenner. He was the pastor from 1820 to 1826 of the German Reformed congregation at the church. The church was what was called a union church. The Lutherans and the German Reformed shared the church building all those years, up until 1952, when the Lutherans left and moved to the hill in Linglestown. They are the evangelical Lutheran church that is in the middle of town. But they were the Lutheran church at Wenrich until they decided to move. That's a story unto itself. We should go over that some other time. And so back in 1820, 1826, there was a Lutheran congregation. There was a German Reformed congregation. John Weinbrenner was the pastor of the German Reformed congregation. And he also was one of those pastors that served several churches at the same time. He had what's called a charge, and the charge included 3 or 4 churches. One of them was Salem UCC from downtown. The charge varied a lot over the years, but there were 4 churches who had him as a pastor. And the German Reforms started getting a little bit upset with him because of his beliefs. That's putting it mildly. One of them was the type of baptism, and there were a lot of other things that bothered the German Reformed congregations. And the four congregations got together and decided to ask him to leave in 1826. Actually, the National Church asked him to leave in 1826, not just us, but to leave the German Reform. And he didn't leave the area. He went out and preached in, open air preaching or any type of building that he could get to preach in, and he stayed around. And in 1828, John Weinbrenner started the Church of God. The Church of God that is now the whole country. Church of God. You go someplace and see a Church of God, he started that. And our Church of God, the Bethel here in Linglestown, Lower Paxton Township, was the first Church of God. And what happened to the German Reformed Church at Wenrich's was a lot of the people agreed with John Weinbrenner and followed him to the Church of God. And suddenly the German Reformed Church at Wenrich's was very small. We could have died out at that point, but along came the Reverend Peter Fisher, who was the next pastor, and he must have done a really good job because he rebuilt that congregation and gave life back into it. Some of his ancestors have visited us at the church, came to church service. Thank you.
Just much.
Right. I'm going to drink some right now. That's okay.
Giving away all my secrets.
How much did you put in your?
Enough to keep you going for a while.
Okay, thanks. So, we're happy that Peter Fisher came along and the church continued. We've had other difficult times too. Actually, the congregation had a bit of a tough time when the Lutheran group left the German Reforms to support the whole facility on their own, and that was difficult. That was in 1952, sorry. But remember, by 1959, the congregation decided to build and added on. So they were very brave, and they built, they added on, and they grew, and that was wonderful. I'm going to move on to the cemetery. Our cemetery records include a note by Nevin Moyer. He actually transcribed all of the stones in the cemetery way back in the early 1920s, I think, after he came back from World War I. He transcribed all of the cemetery, and then he added all the notes he could, that things his parents knew or he heard from other people about who was buried there. And there's a note that Joseph Spahn was buried in the cemetery in 1752. That's the only mention we have of that. There is no stone for Joseph Spahn except this one, which we created. We are creating stones like that for everybody who has an unmarked grave in the cemetery so that they are marked. There are readable stones in the cemetery from the 1790s, burials in the 1790s. There's quite a few readable stones still there. But what about in between 52 and 1790? That's a good question. We do know that many broken stones were removed by a well-meaning caretaker. He was cleaning up the cemetery, and he took all of the broken stones and he either used them as stepping stones or he threw them in the woods. And so he did this in the early 1900s. So we can't help but wonder if some of the burials before the 1790s were marked with those stones. A few of them have been found. This is how we know that some of them went into the woods, because that's where they were found. Wenrich's is the oldest cemetery in the area. Obviously, the Church of God Cemetery isn't the oldest, because that would not have started until 1829, I guess, when the first building was built. And Willow Grove, I found stones there from I think 1848 was the earliest stone that I found. But once again, they could have some that had just disintegrated, but somewhere around there. But Wenrich's is obviously the oldest one right in the Linglestown area. There are many stones that are written in German. The Boy Scouts did a nice job of transcribing and photographing stones back in the 1990s. We had some scouts working for their Eagle projects that took on not just transcribing them, but marking exactly where each stone was on a graph so that you would know where each stone was supposed to be in case it got moved. And they had the German ones translated, so we have the translations. This is Michael Walborn, and he died in 1799. This is a red sandstone tombstone, and we do have quite a few of those. They're getting really bad. Acid rain has been hard on them, so you can't read a lot of them. It's a soft stone, and it rubs away, but there are still some out that look like this. I wanted to highlight some of the burials, but I'm not going to go into them a lot. I'll just highlight them because Dine with the Dead is coming up. I have tickets if anybody wants to come. June 30th, we're doing Wenrich Cemetery at St. Thomas United Church of Christ. I imagine Bill has tickets with him. Oh, very good. Everybody has tickets. And we'll be going into these a little more extensively. So this is just to kind of get you interested. Thomas Lingle, the founder of Lingle.
This is a teaser.
Thomas is in the cemetery. During the celebration of the 250th, we made sure that there was a wreath on his and his wife's graves throughout the whole year. It was done for a year. And so he's there. The Pletz brothers are there. If you've heard of the Pletz brothers, those are those wonderful aviators from 1828. Was it 28, I think? This is George. George and his brother John attempted to fly off the mountain into I think it was their uncle's farm in Fishing Creek Valley. Unfortunately, their flying machine didn't support them. George was killed with a broken neck. John had only a broken arm, so he went on for a longer life. George, his stone was encased in cement way back, we don't know when, to protect it. So that's what it looks like. By the way, don't do that. Don't encase stones in cement. We also have John Eisenhower. He's the half-brother of the great-grandfather of Dwight David Eisenhower. And we have an extensive genealogy that proves that.
I just wanted to butt in here. At the meeting on Tuesday, I gave them a teaser that if they came tonight, they would hear the connection to the White House. So Norm, this is the connection.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. And this is White Feather. You've probably heard of her as well. She was the daughter of a Sioux chief. At least that's how the story goes. A lot of the things about her life, we don't have sources that actually prove them, but there are a lot of interesting stories about Princess White Feather. And this is the original stone from her grave. It is still there, but we now have a brand new stone that marks her grave so that it will continue to be marked when this one finally disintegrates. And if you have the Linglestown 250th booklet, there's a lot. It indicates many of the early settlers who are buried at Wenrich's. When you read about them, it'll say they're buried at Wenrich Cemetery. A few of those are Dr. David Umberger and his wife. And the Gastrock and Fackler families, I just chose those two. There are a lot of other ones. So come on out to Dine with the Dead. Maybe we'll point out a few more. There was a fence around the cemetery. There isn't anymore. If you go back to the 1856 picture I showed you, there was a fence. You had to look really close to see it in the picture. But there's a fence around the cemetery. Slave burials were outside the fence. And yes, there were slaves in this area. And they were buried outside the fence. But they were not alone. Unrepentant sinners were buried outside the fence. What made you an unrepentant sinner? Say the elders of the church discovered some sin that you were committing, and you were approached by the elders of the church, and you were asked to repent for your sins, and you did, but then they found out a second time that you were doing the same thing, and then they found out a third time that you were doing the same thing, and then you became an unrepentant sinner, and you were not allowed to be buried in the cemetery with the rest of the people. You were buried outside the fence. So none of those burials are marked, and we're pretty sure where they would have been, but there are no marks for them. We have considered putting up a stone, a general stone that explains this.
Your law says.
Yeah.
So does the cemetery have, in effect, a number of graves and they have no idea who is where?
Yes, we have some that we have no idea where they are. I'm going to show you the little stones that we make to mark unmarked graves. And these are when we find paperwork that, Pastor Murr, that's one of the Lutheran pastors, all his lists of burials at Wenrich Cemetery, and you'll find this. And then we'll go through there and we'll discover, people that are unmarked. And we're not sure where they were buried. If they have family members, we guess. If there are no family members, we do a stone that is in a long line of stones that is just there to memorialize them, but we don't know where the graves are. Did I answer your question, or do you have?
But I was wondering, how do you actually sew plots?
Oh, it's a closed cemetery.
It's a closed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
That solves that, huh? Yeah, we would have a tough time, because there are lots of obviously empty, well, probably not empty, but unmarked. Yeah. Lots. Yeah, there are quite a few of those. But there were burials in the 1980s in the cemetery, because they were obvious. They were in the newer section way back, and they were like the husband or wife who was already there, and they could do that, but there haven't been any burials since then, and we're just considered closed. Okay, Joe wanted me to go over the maintenance of the cemetery. This is a subject near and dear to me, because the History Preservation Committee got very interested in maintaining the stones in the cemetery and honoring those who aren't marked with some kind of a marker. But to do it to a good degree, to maintain that cemetery, requires the commitment of two of our church committees: History Preservation, Buildings and Grounds, which is another committee, and then many members of the congregation have helped as well. History Preservation organizes the maintenance of the stones, and only the stones. When we took that on, we said, we really don't want anything to do with the mowing and the trimming part of it. Buildings and Grounds had been trying to do all of it. We took over the stones. They continued mowing and trimming. Let me tell you, if you've ever mowed an old cemetery, you just don't take a big lawnmower and go down this row and that row and that row and that row, because the stones are kind of all over the place. It's not easy, and the best way to do it is with a hand mower. You may have a few areas where you could use a riding mower, but a hand mower is the best way to do it. And then it takes a lot of weed whack trimming around the stones. Some cemeteries will put grass killer all the way around a stone so that there's maybe 4 inches of just open soil, and so then all they have to do is mow. And you know what happens to those stones? They gradually start to lean because they don't have the sod holding them in place, and then they tip and fall over. The big ones, it's very expensive to correct. So it's best to have the sod growing right up to your stones, but it takes a lot of trimming. And the congregation helps with this. Periodically, we put out a request for funds so that we can get help raising stones that have fallen, big ones, and we need help with cleaning the stones. And I was shocked the first time I asked for financial help with how much they gave to put the cemetery right. It was just heartwarming. Okay, maintenance of the stones. There's like 4 categories I have here. Marking the unmarked graves, minor repairs that have to be done, large repairs have to be done, and cleaning of the stones, because there's always lichens and molds and stuff growing on them. And there's Joseph Spahn again. I have a reference up there online. We actually used this one quite a bit to learn how to create a marker ourselves out of mortar and cement, and do it, with a financial cost that we could cope with, instead of going out and buying, granite or marble. So we started creating markers similar to Joseph Spahn, and I'll go over that in a little bit. That's a very good reference, the Arizona Pioneer Cemetery Research Project. They created stones that lie flat to the ground. We create stones that lean upward. It's like I have a different file. It's interesting, but there's only one in there. Okay. I had a picture of the equipment that we used to create that, and you really need to see it. Because to create these stones, we created molds to put the mortar in. And the molds are kind of like the shape of a pup tent. You all know what a pup tent is? They're like the shape of a pup tent, so that they are 3-sided, and then they have the ends. And they get filled with mortar and leveled off. And then you can buy little plastic alphabet and numbers of the right size to press into the mortar I'll go back to spell out Joseph Spahn, died 1752. So usually we have a birth and a death date. And then you let the mortar dry and you pop it out of the mold. And then we mortared them onto cement blocks that you can set. You can set the cement blocks an inch or 2 into the ground and leave an inch up, and mortar the stone onto it. It requires a yardstick. What do you call those gadgets? That they use to spread cement evenly. Yeah. And the letters. The mold requires a couple of bricks to hold it in place, and you need mortar that doesn't have stones in it. You want the smooth mortar. And when all is said and done, you want a waterproof sealer that goes over all of this. After you've got it all in place and everything, and a couple of weeks later, you come back and you seal it. It's an interesting process. I can't say we have a lot of fun doing it, but we laugh a lot. Okay, sometimes you have to do minor repairs to the stones. Small stones that break in half or just simply fall over and need support to stay up. This is going to be on YouTube. There'll be
Yes, we'll have that.
Yeah, so if you go on YouTube later and you're interested, you can copy them down.
One of the reasons we're going to video this and put it up on YouTube is that one of our projects going forward is going after some of these older cemeteries in the area. And that's why I asked Kathy to come and help us and explain what's going on, because we have a lot of cemeteries that we want to really attack. The Church of God is one that has broken stones.
Bless you. I don't think the Church of God can afford to do their cemetery. Those are my 3 favorite ones. There are others you can find online. And here we are. I'm going to go through a little bit of the process of doing a minor repair. We have in place a mold. We have dug a hole in the ground, leveled the bottom of the hole, and we've put a mold into that, and it looks like this. And the mold is made out of wood. The upper part is also going to get covered with plastic, and it can be lifted right up, and that upper part is what makes the slot in your cement base that the stone will slip into. And that's what it looks with cement. You fill it almost all the way with cement. You put the top mold in place that has a board that's going straight down in to create a hole. And then you finish it off with the cement so that once it's all dry, this is what it looks like. I'm not sure this is exactly the same base that in the previous pictures, but they all look the same. They're just made to fit. We have to make the molds to fit the stone that we're working with. You don't have just one mold and it works for everything. I wish, don't I wish? But you have to make it to fit. And in the end, you look at something like this. Cemetery stones do not like cement. That's why I said don't use cement to encase a stone. The cement gradually wears on the stone and makes things worse. So when this is done, what you do is you put mortar into the slot that you're going to set the stone down in. And you make sure that there is space all around the stone and under the stone for the mortar, so that what that stone is really sitting in is mortar. It's not rubbing against cement. And there are directions on exactly how to do this, so that you know how to measure things and create it, so that when in the end you pick up this stone and you try to put it in its slot, it fits. We have done this, oh gosh, with about 6 or 7 stones in our cemetery. That type of repair we have done. We have done other repairs that are broken stones that you epoxy together, and there's a really special, wonderful epoxy out there that works to hold them in place, and you have to do it carefully so that you don't have epoxy slipping out and gooping all over everything. And then you have to brace the stones in place while the epoxy dries. And I'm sorry I don't have pictures of that process. Sometimes I forget my camera when we're doing these things. They get done and then I go, oh No pictures, darn. Okay, large repairs. For large repairs, we decided for safety's sake, we really needed to go to the experts. And that's when we went to the congregation and we said, these stones weigh anywhere from 1 to 2 tons. Because some of them were big, big tablet stones, you know, yay thick and that high. And it's best to have somebody with the right equipment to work with them. So we went to the experts, and the congregation was wonderful. We had the money to do it and we're saving to do some more. We keep on going because the stones are always falling over. There's nothing you can do. And the cemetery, you may have noticed, is kind of sloped this way and that way and that way, and all those stones that are on a slope have a tendency to want to fall. So this is Gingrich Memorials. They were our choice. You can check around and see what you think is best, but they gave us a flat price, not an hourly price, so we knew exactly what we were going to deal with, and it worked out pretty well. We discovered that these guys, everybody at Gingrich Memorials, have specific older cemeteries that they help to take care of. They are so into it that in their spare time, they go out and volunteer to help take care of the cemeteries. So those cemeteries get an expert to help them. I wish we could. So this is one of the things they use. How you get into a cemetery that you can't drive into, they have a great big crane that goes out and is counterbalanced, and they can lift those great big stones using that crane. And this is them preparing to replace the stone that was on that truck I showed you originally. They're making sure that the little metal tabs fit down into the holes, because they used to make stones that way. They held them in place just by metal, like rebar. It wasn't rebar then, but like rebar going up into the stone and down in the base, and they just sit it there. And the weight was supposed to hold it in place. They don't trust that anymore. They are making sure that everything that they took the stone to their shop and leveled it off. They brought it back. They're making sure it's going to fit. And then before they put it in, they use some of that super duper wonderful epoxy that you can actually buy from them if you want to. I don't know the name of it, but they'll know what you're looking for if you call it that super duper wonderful epoxy. And they put some of that on, and then using the crane, they lowered it in place, and when all was said and done, that stone looked identical to the one to the right, which was the spouse of. So I don't have a picture of it right in place, but it looks identical to the one on the right. Cleaning the stones. Oh, what fun. Don't know if any of you read up on this, but there's a lot of do's and don'ts for cleaning cemetery stones. And we probably in the past ourselves have done things that we now know we shouldn't have done. Like take a piece of chalk and rub it all over the tombstone so you can read it. Not a good idea. Darn, they discovered that chalk eats into the stone. so that, and the best I found before digital photography, which is undoubtedly the best way to transcribe a tombstone, is digital photography. You take that back, you stick it in your computer, you play around with it, and suddenly you can read the stone. But you can also take a piece of aluminum foil and a gloved hand and rub up and down over the stone, and the aluminum foil picks up all the indentations, and frequently you can read the transcription on the aluminum foil better than you can read the stone. That at least doesn't leave anything on the stone. But I'm with my little camera all the time now. It's my favorite. There are many sites on the web that will help you with what to do with cleaning stones. I put 3 of my favorites there. There are new ones that I haven't even read yet because they keep coming out. But here are the basic do's and don'ts of cleaning a tombstone. First off, remember, do no harm. You should evaluate the stone before you begin with it. If it's one of those red sandstone stones, don't clean it. Just, I'm sorry, but any type of cleaning is going to be hard on them. If it's granite, which is very common these days, you can do a whole lot more vigorous cleaning with granite. But the other types in between sandstone and granite, you kind of have to be careful. Marble is one of them that you have to be careful with. Use soft bristled brushes, not natural bristles, but plastic bristles. And if you want to remove lichens from a stone, soft plastic scrapers for gradually working lichens off. The process should start with wetting down the stone, lots of clear water, just clear water to totally wet down the stone before you work with it. And then clean the stone, if at all possible, with just water from the bottom up. There are many cases when just water is not enough. You're going to want something else. And then when you're all done, totally clean off the stone with clear water. Only use the cleaning solution when necessary. It needs to be biodegradable, non-abrasive, non-corrosive, not household bleach, but calcium hypochlorite, which is the chemical that is used in swimming pools to kill algae in swimming pools. One of the brand names is Shock. Actually, I've never found Shock. I go out to Home Depot and I go to the swimming pool area for all the equipment for swimming pools, and you can find what you're looking for. Just make sure that it's just calcium hypochlorite, that it's not one of those products that have other things in it as well. And that's what helps to remove algae. It'll help keep lichens from growing, mosses, things, the green growth. It helps with the black algae. It's what we started using at first. We've changed, but it takes money to change. D2, which I have as the very last thing, is a product that is created specifically to clean stone sculptures, any kinds of stones, tombstones, gravestones. It's used a lot for that these days. The national government uses it to clean a lot of its stuff. But D2 is very expensive. I can't quote the exact price right now, but probably. I just ordered some too. I found the cheapest, and I think a gallon of it is $49 or something like that for a gallon of D2. When you read about the use of D2, you're going to read about a whole bunch of different ways of using it. Some people say dilute it 1:4. Some people say use it full strength. Since it's so expensive, the dilution of 1:4 sounds pretty good, but it doesn't work as well. And as D2 has become used in more and more, they've discovered that what you can do with D2 if you want to, and it does work. We've tried it, but it's expensive. So wet down the stone, spray the stone thoroughly with D2, and walk away. Leave the D2 on the stone and go back and check the stone. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. It keeps getting better and better. It's a wonderful product. You don't have to work hard. to do it, and it works for you. And gradually, Mother Nature washes it down for you, especially around here these days. You probably have trouble keeping it on the stone. So, I mean, it is a great product, and we have decided that we're going to use it. We're going to put the money into it because who cleans, oops, forgot this one, I apologize. Do not ever use a pressure washer on a tombstone. Sounds real easy, but it eats away at that stone. I don't know, I used a pressure washer on my wooden table on the patio once, and I put an arc of indentation across the wooden table because of the pressure of it. You can imagine what it would do to a softer tombstone. Never use metal. Never use anything that is a soap or scented product that includes shaving cream. For a while, people thought shaving cream was the way to do this. But the things that make it soap or scented sit on the stone are very hard to wash off and gradually hurt the stone. And the least amount I have seen in articles is never clean a stone more frequently than every 18 months. Some of the articles will say every 10 years. So it varies how long you're supposed to wait before you go back and clean. Longer is better because every time you clean a stone, you are injuring it a little bit, no matter what you use. Who does the cleaning? Anybody you can get to pay attention to the do's and don'ts of cleaning a tombstone. And so we asked congregational members a couple of times to come out and help us with cleaning the stones. Sometimes you're using a toothbrush to get the little molds and lichens out of things. And so this is the process. A hose that gives us clean water, a bucket that we can work with, brushes of different kinds. Whoops. And here's the product. The stone this is before and after. I forget, that's Maggie Beatty. And that's a before and after of J.J. Wenrich. He died at Gettysburg in the Civil War. So you go from a stone you can't read to a stone you can read. And it feels so good. It just feels so good when you can do that. So we started cleaning in 2013. We actually were starting to clean for Lingelstown 250th. And we knew the cemetery would probably get more people coming than usual, and we wanted it to look good, so we started cleaning. But now it's time to start all over again, 6 years later. And some of the stones that we did in 2013 look like it. They now have black mold on them. So are you interested in helping us maintain our historical cemetery? We would welcome anybody's help. Come talk to me. I'll be glad to have you.